Very pleased to introduce Jacob de Zoete, who recently became a doctor, and he's going to talk about probabilistic models of art, of trying to infer artist for a moment.
Indeed, thank you. So let me start. Let me start by giving you some info on the project I'm working on. So in the Netherlands, there is a project going on together with the University of Amsterdam, the Rijksmuseum, the Van Gogh Museum, and some other smaller parties. And what they want to do is that basically they want to have a more scientific approach to attributing paintings to painters. So now what's common is that they have a painting of which they might suspect that it's by, for example, Van Gogh or Van Gogh. I will just use the Dutch pronunciation.
Please.
And they collect all this evidence, and then they just say, well, all of it together makes us decide that this is by Van Gogh or by someone else. And within this seed money project, the idea is that there will be 2 pilot studies for 2 paintings, and mostly we're doing a sort of a proof of concept, like how could we use, for example, probabilistic models to evaluate the strength of the evidence combined. And they asked me to do this because I recently defended my thesis, which was on combining forensic evidence, and many questions that you might have with attributing paintings could also be relevant in forensic science. Not direct questions, but definitely the relation between questions. So you have evidence, and that directs to a painter or directs to a suspect, etc., etc. So in this talk, I will present some work that I did together with people from the Van Gogh Museum, based on this painting, and all the arguments that I present in terms of evidence also come from this article by these 3 people, which the first one is definitely involved in this project, but I've also spoken to the other 2. So this article came out in the Burlington magazine in 2013, and there they sort of presented the case that this painting was by Van Gogh, and that they attributed it to Van Gogh. So these people all work at the Van Gogh Museum. Okay, so let's, as an introduction, start with one of the pieces of evidence. When Van Gogh was working in France, he sent many letters to his brother in Amsterdam, or wherever he was living at the time, but mostly in Amsterdam, I believe, stating what he was been doing. And one of these letters stated, yesterday at sunset, I was in the stony heath where very small twisted oaks grow. In the background, a ruin on the hill and wheat fields in the valley. It was romantic, it couldn't be more so out on Monticelli. The sun was pouring its very yellow rays over the bushes on the ground, absolutely a shower of gold, and all the lines were beautiful. The whole scene had a charming nobility. You wouldn't have been at all surprised to see knights and ladies suddenly appear, returning from hunting with hawks, or to hear the voice of an old provenance troubadour. The field seemed purple, the distance is blue, and I brought back a study of it too, but it was well below what I wished to do. And then if you read into this letter and you look at the painting, you might say, well, here we have a ruin on the hill, we have very small twisted oaks, we have wheat fields in the valley, yellow rays or distances that are blue. And then you might say, well, this is obviously by Van Gogh, because he presented this, he sent this letter that he made a painting, and the description matches with the evidence. So this is one of the arguments, definitely not the only one, that is presented in this article. But if you would, and what I did, if you talk to these experts and you ask, like, well, is this convincing evidence? Then they say, well, that's not enough, but it definitely points you into the direction, because they have this database online with all the letters translated to English. And on this website is vangoghletters.org, I believe it is. They link these mentioned paintings to actual paintings that were attributed to Van Gogh. But with the more approaches that I would use in forensic evidence.
Are the letters authentic?
Well,
They don't have letters or anything. Someone that makes it up writes like letters.
Well, with Van Gogh, most of the work has been, was still in the hands of people that were associated with Van Gogh. So the wife of his brother gave all this material to. But you can even ask questions about whether these are authentic or not.
And what did the experts make of the comment about him saying it wasn't up to scratch or whatever, some words to that effect?
Yeah, they did mention this, that apparently this was not up to his level of what he.
And they agree with that assertion?
I think they do. I haven't discussed all of this thoroughly with them.
As I recall from the text of the letter, he says first that he actually made a painting of this scene.
Well, he ends with
And
that
also he states that he went home with a study, which he did not like, or was to that effect. But the study could be different from the painting.
I assume it was the same thing.
Definitely.
That's my recollection of the text of that letter.
We could look at the letter, but I don't think it's the most important part. It's mostly an introduction to the overall evidence. So, if you only look at this letter as a piece of evidence, then if you would evaluate it in terms of what I did in forensics, it's you have to assess the value of this letter when it was made by Van Gogh compared to that it was made by someone else. So we won't assess the letter here, but this was to sort of get the message across to the experts that work at the Van Gogh Museum. So the research goal for both of these pilot studies, or for the project as a whole, is that we would like to construct a model that simultaneously gives an overview of the information delivered by different specialists in establishing the Zoete way, which we can do in the Bayesian network. We're mostly interested in working with as you would do in forensic, with likelihood ratios. So value of evidence given one hypothesis over the other. And already when you would start with such a painting, something that struck me was that it's challenging to come up with an alternative hypothesis, because you can just say someone else, or you could say someone that worked during the time of Van Gogh. You could say, well, he didn't have any students with any other painter. You could say, well, one of his students will be the other pilot study that I'll mention in the end.
Or someone trying to fake a Van Gogh.
Yeah.
Indeed, yeah. Well, you could come up with many, but indeed you could also think of that.
Someone saw the letter.
Yeah.
Um,
Fake the letter.
But there's more than the letter. And the problem with the letter is that you also have to sort of copy his whole handwriting and have the stamps that were put on there in each number. So
It is authenticity.
it is difficult. And when so this presentation is very similar to one I gave to experts in art. I needed to add this slide because there were some art experts sort of slightly annoyed by that. They thought that I just collected some evidence and modeled it. So I wanted to be very specific that I'm working together with people from the Van Gogh Museum, and they give me the evidence, and they give me how to evaluate this and how much value you should put on this or that. Very similar to work that I'm doing in forensics, where I talk with DNA experts. I only model their arguments. I don't come up with my own evidence. Okay, so what I would like to do is discuss three pieces of evidence that I got from this article and how I decided to model them, and the questions I asked the experts to come up with some numbers, or to get some idea of how rare it is to see something. So after Van Gogh died, all of the paintings that he had in France were sent to an apartment in Paris, and there the wife of his brother, Jo Bonger, started to make an inventory of all the works that they had there, and they put it in a sort of little notebook, which they still have at the Van Gogh Museum, and they just wrote down, well, this is this, this is that. And most of the paintings in this inventory have been linked to actual paintings now. Where, for example, number 180 was still empty, which says sunset at Arles 30. So this is a picture of this notebook, and then here it says sous la caution à 30. So the number 30 here is an identification, at least I believe, of the format portrait, which was a standard format for canvases that you could buy, which is this 92 by 73, and also the painting Sunset of Montmajoux has this format, so I believe that this links to the size of the painting. Furthermore, the number 180 is written on the back of the canvas, as you can see here. And similarly, the argument goes in the article that the painting catalog reserved for in the inventory catalog reserved for the Vincent van Gogh painting called Wheatfield with Setting Sun is listed under number 100, which is this painting, and the number 100 is written on the back of Wheatfield with Setting Sun, as you can see here.
And does Wheatfield with Setting Sun have Van Gogh's signature on it?
Well, it is attributed to Van Gogh, but indeed that's not a question that you could ask, like how certain are we that this is made by Van Gogh? But
No, I'm just asking the question because it is a factor in the Sunset at Montmajoux.
the factor whether it's made by Van Gogh, you mean, or
The
So there's
absence-
no signature.
The
There is-
signature.
There is no signature
Is there
on
a signature or not?
it's not very common to have a. Well,
No.
there are many paintings by Van Gogh that don't have a signature.
Okay.
Uh,
And there
But
wasn't one on that.
the original problem with the attribution, the original reason why it was doubted that it was by Van Gogh, was the fact that it does not bear his signature.
No,
That
not
was-
necessarily. Like the majority of the works by Van Gogh were given to what is now the Van Gogh Museum shortly after Van Gogh died, and Jo Bommer, his wife and his brother, sold a couple before that, and some were already sold there, or they were left there. So the majority was given to the people that are now the museum.
Yeah.
And they don't have a signature on. The majority
Some
don't.
do, but some don't. But
How many? What's the proportion?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's.
Anyway, it doesn't matter, but it's clearly an important piece of evidence.
well, it depends on what you would like to model. So that's what I've been seeing. What I've been stumbled upon anytime when I'm working on these
And
problems.
these
That you can
numbers
put.
on the back were written by the person making that list.
We're getting there.
Okay.
But what you often encounter is that you believe that there's some sort of uncertainty. You would like to incorporate that there might be uncertainty whether Van Gogh made this painting in the first place. But you can go into any direction, and there are like so many things you can do. And I think that's also sort of links with what you can do in forensics and activity level questions, where you can say, oh, we could think of this and we could think of this. But in the end, you have to make some assumptions. And starting point from the work that I'm doing here is that the paintings that I name here, like Wheatfield and Setting Sun, is that these are actually by Van Gogh, and that we're using these assumptions that they have that these are made by Van Gogh, and we're checking whether this flows in with the rest of them. And then the final argument that they make about this, or the final argument they present here, is that the handwriting of these 100 and 180 suggests that they were written by the same person. And what's also sort of striking is that all of these numbers are written upside down on the back of the canvas, and the hypothesis that they had is that they were making this inventory list, and they wanted to number the ones that were very similar in terms of what you could see in the painting, because it would say bring them to some. Well, if they were planning on bringing for a museum or whatever, you would like to give some more. You have 100 and 180. And the idea was that packers were just writing it like this, and they were all standing up next to the wall, and that's the reason that they're upside down. That's again something that you could sort of incorporate.
Where was this painting sent to, or where was it found?
This
This
painting?
disputed painting, yeah.
Yeah, well, I could discuss that a bit at the end, but so the idea of the presentation is not that we're trying to solve whether this is a Van Gogh or not.
No, but we would like
Okay.
we would like to have the background of evidence
But there's like,
against which this study
Yeah, why it's done.
has taken place.
well, sort of the very short story is how that they got this painting is that it's now in the collection of sort of an unknown person to me, but known to the museum. And they tried to trace back where it was beforehand. And what they believe is that at some point it was bought by someone in Paris, and it went to, I believe, the French ambassador in Norway, or the something like that. And then a friend of this ambassador said, well, that's not a Van Gogh, you have no idea. And so he was annoyed because he bought this painting, he thought he had a Van Gogh painting, so he put it in the attic, and it was there for like 40 or 50 years, and that's why well, the Van Gogh Museum never saw it again. And then interestingly, in '92, you can always claim that you have a Van Gogh and send something to the museum. You have to send some pictures, and they also at one point sent this, and then the Van Gogh Museum said, well, this is not a Van Gogh. And now later on, they got it again, and they did a more proper study, and they said, okay, this is a Van Gogh painting. But there are like, we could go on, you could ask any question, and sometimes I might know the answer, and there's a whole story behind it. But I guess that's more suitable for after this presentation if you want to know more, or I could give you the article, the original article of the Bernardton magazine. So this is sort of what I extracted from the article as evidence that they present in terms of why this is also by Van Gogh. And the way they present it essentially is it's in text, but you have some sort of a bullet points like this. And if you read all this, at least that's what I have, I think, yeah, okay, this definitely increases my belief that Van Gogh is the author. But how does all these pieces play together? So for example, what is the significance of a number on the back? How to evaluate this port at 30 thing, and how to formalize the relation with wheat field and setting sun. Similarity in depiction and description, because on the painting you also see something that could be in the RLA, which appears to be a sunset. And this sort of is exactly what they want me to work on. They have all of these arguments, but it's not modeled in any way. You do feel that there's something there, but it's unclear how to model it. So I decided to come up with, or I was working on this, and I thought this was this particular piece of evidence, the most soothing combination of the evidence and how things combine to each other. So you have who's the artist of the painting, and there is are these numbers written because of the catalog. There is evidence that there's the depiction similarity with the description. What you see with what you read in the inventory. There's similar handwriting, and then the argument is something like this. For example, you could say, well, the handwriting of 100 and 180 is similar, which makes it more likely that these numbers on the back of the different canvases were written by the same person. Furthermore, what's the assumption? Wheatfield of Setting Sun is painted by Van Gogh. So the canvas with 100 on the back is by Van Gogh. And then this is also sort of an assumption that given that this is the case, then this 100 was written because of this inventory list that was made back then. Furthermore, there is a match in depiction and description, depiction on the painting description in the inventory. And these two pieces together makes it more likely that 180 was also written because the relation to the catalog or the inventory, it's the same person. Probably for the same reason, which makes it more likely that this is painting Sunset at Montmajour, which increases your belief that it's Van Gogh, and then you can also include that there is a match between the depiction and the description, which should again increase your belief that this is Van Gogh. And here we're still using, we're not really working with numbers, first of all, because I cannot come up with these numbers, I have to discuss this with experts, and I doubt to what extent you can come up with proper numbers for the situation. I think you can sort of believe in a sort of order of magnitude, this is stronger than this, but saying, well, if this and this matches, then with 99% sure you see a match in the fiction description, might be a bit off. Okay. So another piece of evidence, these three sections with the canvas and the catalog, you can sort of independently read. So another piece of evidence, again, that they present in terms of just written text and these bullet points, is that the canvas on which Sunset at Montmajour was made is as they call a commercial ready primed canvas that matches the type of a painting called The Rocks, which is, I believe, in a museum in Houston in America, which is a assumed to be by Van Gogh, and therefore I will sort of put a probability one that this was made by Van Gogh.
And that was done in roughly the same time?
Yeah. Well, if they were both made by Van Gogh and it links with the evidence that we have in terms of these letters, then these definitely were made in roughly the same time.
How
In
common
roughly
is
the
that
same
canvas
region?
type?
We get there. Very good. It's good that you have the same questions that I had. So one thing that they do is that they count the threads in the canvas. For the Montmajor painting, the painting that we discussed here, the average horizontal thread density was this 15.9, and the average vertical thread density was 17.6 per centimeter. And for the rocks, it's the same, but only horizontal and vertical are sort of mixed up. And the if some what is going on, I could give some idea of what the idea is in terms of the evidence. So what apparently painters did more often, or at least hopefully more often, is that he would buy a huge piece of canvas. And what I mentioned in the first bullet point is that it's a ready primed canvas, means that the one that sells on this canvas already puts some sort of ground layer of paint on there. And then since it's made in the same factory, that the average thread count here and the average thread count here, you expect to be sort of the same. And what is vertical and horizontal is mixed up, is the claim that they have is that you might cut out a piece here which you use for the Montmajor painting, which is like this, and this was used for the rocks, but then upside down or flipped. And they haven't done enough research in that sense, but they at least believe that it would be possible to add more paintings here. But they didn't do a thread count of all of these as of yet, because many, as I said, were given to the museum shortly after Van Gogh died, and then you're not doing, let's do the thread count. But they want to do this at some point in the future to get some idea of what pieces were in between, because they're even apparently they're even able to see that there is some distance between. That these were not next to each other on the original bigger piece of canvas. That has to do with just go into too much detail. So when they hang this canvas out to dry, then it's put this sort of little ropes like this, and you sort of see where it's stretched and where it's less stretched, because it has to do with where it's put next to on the wall or whatever where they dry it. So they can sort of figure out based on that there should be something in between this painting and that painting. Okay.
I assume you meant what you said rather than what you've written there. I assume those are the wrong way around. You said it was inverted.
Oh, I see. Yeah, there is a
Yeah.
So it should be different than what you see here, but well, the idea is clear. It doesn't really matter, but just to get some background on this. Okay. So apart from this thread count, they also looked at this ground layer that was put on there before they sold the canvas, and they checked what elements were present in this white ground layer. So there is some lead white and some other stuff with yellow ochre, and then there is another layer on top of this ground layer that contains more lead white and less Gaussian ground, and the lower one. And that also holds for this painting, the rocks that I showed. So then there are sort of two independent, not necessarily condition dependent, but independent, or at least that you could ask that by giving the right questions, asking the right questions to the experts, that suggest that these come from the same bigger piece of canvas, which should support that they were both made by the same person. Since the rocks is made by Van Gogh, you also assume that, or it also increased the belief that Montmajor was made by Van Gogh.
They don't date canvas, the bits of canvas. They can't do some sort of carbon dating.
Sorry?
Carbon dating?
They also can do that. Yeah, I couldn't. So not all the evidence that is in this article is they have more than what's in the article. And actually, for something that I'm working on now, which is only mentioned at the end of this presentation, I would like to have some more information of the date of the paint. But here I have not included that. But again, that's why you should sort of see it as a sort of a starting proof of concept. They have to get used to the fact that someone that did not study art might be able to help them, and I need to get used to their way of posing problems and also the type of evidence that they're working with. So I have this structure, but now, different from the previous one, I would like to have some idea of how rare it is to see certain similarities, for example, in the ground layer or in this thread count. So these are a couple of questions that I asked one particular expert that worked on this attribution to Van Gogh. For example, how unlikely is it that two different canvases, in terms of that they come from different rolls, will have the same thread count? And then she said, well, that's certainly possible, assuming that a particular loom creates a characteristic thread density pattern that continues across rolls. And furthermore, I asked how unlikely is it two different canvases have the same set of ground layers, and again, that's certainly possible. And what is nice about asking these questions is that I get some sort of feedback of how strong different pieces of evidence are and how rare it is to see something given different hypotheses. But the experts that I spoke with the Van Gogh Museum, they said that they really liked that they got to answer these sort of direct questions, and that made them think of, well, we present this argument in terms of what the similar thread count. But the moment you get these questions, you become aware of what you need to take into account to actually make this attribution to Van Gogh. And for now, we only say, it's the same one, we're there.
They answered the questions with the assumption that they were that the canvases were essentially made at the same time, or roughly at the same time. Did you ask them about the possibility you would get that pattern?
Yeah. So this
is different time intervals.
I asked this question in like 3 ways. So one was given that they were bought in the sort of same time frame. What if they were bought, one in France and the other one in Norway? But I've only used part of it here, and some questions we need to have sort of follow-up questions to really get to the. But again, because all the evidence sort of plays together in terms of, well, if you assume that it was made in France or that it was made in southern France, then you should reevaluate all the evidence you had before, because certain ground layers might be more common in southern France, or actually they are, than they were in Norway, for example. So we can go in like a million directions, but since it's only sort of a pilot study, and the idea is that I'm working on this for like 3 or 4 months, hopefully we have many questions that seem to be interesting, because the follow-up research plan that they will have is to get some other grant, and then the pilot study that I'm doing now should sort of give an indication whether it makes sense to do follow-up research on this. So one outcome could be, well, we've already solved it, it's really easy. The other one could be, well, there are many interesting questions and there seems to be reason to explore other opportunities for Bayesian networks.
What would be the evidential value of looking at the 2 comparison paintings? Right, so in this case, you've got different comparison paintings. So it's the rocks, and there's a connection between that and the. So you're basically saying, right, these 2 things are coming from the same sample, say the
Same roll of
right,
canvas.
same rock, and then in the other case, the other 2 paintings are being judged.
Based on the number on the
Right,
back.
so then does it make sense? I mean, if you were from a formal point of view, would you connect those other paintings, like the 2 contrasting paintings together? You say, right, okay, well, are they all from the same role? Does that tell you anything useful in terms of adding to the possibility?
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
I see what you mean. So I think the first painting with the wheat fields, I'm not sure, but I would doubt whether that also comes from this particular roll. But if you would have more paintings that sort of fall in here, then at some point you can maybe see, well, the cut was made here, and you really know that these were next to each other. And then, so just thinking out loud here, I could imagine that she could say, well, if you really see that they're right next to each other, that should be more convincing that we're made by the same person than if one was over here and one was over there. Yes.
What about the paints? Because at least I recall Theo supplied the paintings to Van.
Correct. Yeah, we'll get that. That's the third evidence that sort of structure-wise we're discussing.
Jacob, can I just ask,
Yes,
is that their answer? Certainly possible.
Yes. This is.
Is that, I mean, did you push them to be a bit more,
No, this. No. Well, I will push them at some point, but so.
because you can't really do much with that, can you?
Well, you cannot really do much with that, but you can sort of get an idea of whether something is like extremely rare or that it is possible. So this is sort of the first. This comes from the first set of questions I sent to them,
Oh, yeah.
and
So you could have said not possible.
and one of her responses was, "Well, I am not an expert on this particular type of evidence, but I can give you an idea based on my expertise and what I know from working in this field for so long." And that's the one that I contact with most. But now we're setting up this, or we're planning on setting up sort of a larger set of questions where they really have to sort of can pick between a range of certainty, so to say. And the idea is that more experts will join. So an expert on particularly the painter, or expert on the canvas that did the thread count,
Yeah,
stuff
yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Just in terms of a verbal, like certainly possible, saying that suggests that it's not, doesn't happen all the time, but it's certainly possible. I mean, there's
Yeah.
an implication there that I'm just wondering.
Yeah.
What's the possibility that a clever fraudster would be looking exactly for these types of features of a known Van Gogh original in order to make sure that basic, those basic components are in their fraudulent painting?
He's
That
got,
would be the obvious way
he's
to
got
go,
a base
wouldn't
net.
it?
He's got the basement.
Obvious way to go in terms that you do all
That would
this.
be, so that's, I mean, they should be able to answer how, if 50 years later a fraudster wanted to make a copy and pass it off as a Van Gogh, then a clever fraudster would be looking for exactly to replicate these
Yeah.
things. They're exactly the things that, because they would know that's the sort of thing they'd be looking for.
Yeah.
How easy would it be to actually create or get hold of a canvas to that specification?
I totally agree, but what I believe at this point is that, so I show all these sort of subparts of the network I'm working on, and they're all connected to a bigger thing, and I believe that sort of in bigger scale of things, that if the alternative hypothesis is different, so you could say someone from his time or a fraudster, that the overall network is somehow the same, but the numbers are very different, because you have to take into account, for example, how possible is it that first of all this person is aware of this inventory list with the number in it, and how easy it is to get the materials that he was using back then, and then you can also take the sort of the age part into account, the paints, and how easy is it to do stuff like that. But within this study, the sort of proof of concept pilot study, we are not, or I am not, because I essentially do this. I'm not really using the alternative hypothesis that's made by a fraudster at this point, but you could definitely do that. But so the goal of this work is not to so put all the evidence from the article in the network, because that would take way too long, and subsequently state, well, this is not made by Van Gogh, they made a mistake because these numbers and this and that. That's not the idea here now. So the idea is
Definitely, your alternative
What is
hypothesis
it? Yeah, you
here
have
is
to have an alternative.
it's something like a person, living around about the same time, painted a similar,
Just copy,
or,
tends
was
to be
painting in a
like
similar
Van Gogh.
style.
Yeah, I mean, we need to know how many people there were who were painted a lot like Van Gogh, don't we?
if we want to
How many rooms are
if we want to solve that question with this work indeed, but now we're mostly structuring the evidence. But then you need to know that. But then, like, the follow-up question is, like, how many people were interested in copying a Van Gogh painting that did not sell back then? Like, oh, now I'm going to make one, and also don't sell it, because that doesn't really make any sense. And then you have to make sure that there are all these. For that point, I think it's really interesting to work on this for a while, because in forensic I could sort of look limited situations, and you could make some assumptions. But this one case study, where there are many, is already so broad that you can take all these questions that you're asking into that you can go further and further, and like, oh, we should take this into account, and that is really difficult, I believe. So, for example, I'm working on the last piece of evidence is where was this made, and if Van Gogh made it, it was made in this particular village, there and there in our lab, in the southern part of France. But if not, what do you take into account? Because that influences all of the other evidence, like how likely is it that you can get this type of paint there? How likely is it that you can get? So you need to limit yourself in terms of sort of proof of concept.
Yeah,
You can definitely do that, but actually evaluating the evidence. So I think for the people from the Van Gogh Museum, it's mostly interesting to think of the questions like these that you actually need to take into account when attributing these paintings. But coming up with a network that will actually solve the question in terms of everything that you can take into account, that is far away, and they also need to be sort of become more aware of what you can do with these networks. So I think they're all sort of aware now that if I'm done with this, or I've sort of finished the work on this one, they cannot put in the evidence from another painting in this particular network and see, oh, this is one. Because the other case study is by paintings of Frans Hals, and they thought, well, we can just use the network from Van Gogh and put Frans Hals evidence in there, and then we get it. No, because we take the number into account, we look at the matching painting, so it's, for every painting you have to do different stuff, so yeah, they're also new to
There is some
the-
generic stuff you can abstract.
Definitely, yeah, but it's,
In particular, I just had an idea. I mean, the number on the back seems quite important, and right?
yeah, that is very interesting because
Because one of the very first cases of statistics used for a forensic case dates back to, I think it's 1800s. Howland Will, I don't know if you, where they, yeah, it was trying to see if their signature on a will was faked or not. So there's statistical models to be able to compare to numbers in this case.
but
So you can get some.
these numbers on the back are relatively rare now for Van Gogh paintings, because many of these paintings they assume they found other ones where there was a number on the back that also linked to the inventory, but there are they believe that there are way more. But when museums might decide, well, let's make it nice and good on the back and just put something else on top of it, so you might not see that anymore. And what they told me, which sort of makes sense, that it's quite difficult to tell a museum, well, we need your Van Gogh painting to do some work. We need it for 2 months. They're like, you won't know because no one will come to your museum anymore. So it's quite hard to get data from paintings that they do not have. Kind of you get a little sample of the paint and put it in a scanner.
No, you could photograph the numbers and do
Yeah, but there, so many of the numbers are now put on, are now underneath another layer of paint that they put on top of there to.
Okay, but you showed us 100 and 180.
Yeah, so these are two, but it's not the case. Yeah.
Yeah, the 180 they say comes from a true Van Gogh, right? And you question.
100 comes from the true Van Gogh, and the 180 is the one that they're questioning in this
Okay,
paper.
I
and
got
they
it the
prove.
wrong
Yeah,
way around.
yeah.
But, yeah, you could.
So I'm going to just pick up on Norman's point. It does feel really important what we think the alternatives are, because the number, it makes a huge difference. I mean, if it's just someone imitating, just enjoying, like trying to be a bit like Van Gogh, then why would they go and number it? Whereas, I mean, I feel that we do need to think quite hard, I'm sure you have anyway, about what are the, kind of alternative hypotheses, because they will shape the relevance of different bits of evidence. Like the 80 makes
But even that's not as simple as that, because actually this could have been in, one of the hypotheses which seems to be your focus on is that there were other paintings, people doing this type of painting around the same time.
Yeah,
where you
that's
could get
fine.
that.
Yeah.
But then afterwards,
Yeah,
the
but
whole
the
place,
number-
that could have been but that could
Someone
have been
numbered it
up.
by mistake.
No, afterwards someone saw a thing which looks like a Van Gogh.
And
It's
thought,
clearly
oh,
from the same
yeah,
time.
yeah.
Why not try and pass that off as a Van Gogh?
No, exactly. So that's my point. That you need to worry about
I
these
don't,
things.
Norm,
Yeah,
and
that's
here you have to do some art history. I don't believe that when Van Gogh was alive, he had many followers.
No, I'm not saying that's the whole point.
No.
So
But
I
the
don't think
people,
it would have
all it would
been
have taken was someone, because that's the hypothesis, that someone actually around that time was painting like Van Gogh.
Yeah,
Not to
make them-
not to follow him, it's just the style. That
It
was,
is.
maybe someone saw his paintings and also was, There might be someone in the same field at the same time.
Well,
Give me a
just-
bit of your
Or it could
canvas.
be
I'll
somebody that
I'll
you
do
want to
something
make a
like
lot of
that.
money.
Yeah.
It's done a very good imitation.
So
right?
to pick up that,
Not deliberately.
I do agree with that. It's really interesting if you work on this, think of the alternative and think, we have a fraudster on our hands here. And
But that discussion we've just had got very close to what I think is a potentially critical piece of evidence, because I've had a look at a high resolution image of that painting,
okay, sure,
and you can see a great deal of detail
Yeah,
in the
definitely.
actual brushwork.
indeed, very good. That's one of the final slides. Yes.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So, you know, all this arguing about who might have used different pieces of canvas or whatever, that's minor compared with studying the brushwork.
Well, I
Because-
wouldn't be the judge what is minor or major. I think there's way more that they have that there is in the article just than what I'm presenting here, and there is way more that's not even in the article. So there's all of this evidence, and yet, so picking up on what Norman was saying, that is definitely a hypothesis that I would like to take into account, that it's by a fraudster. But here I work with a very broad, it's by someone else, because I just want to model the argument, and then we can put in a certain alternative hypothesis and see how the numbers differ for different networks. But again, this is not a study where we're actually checking whether the initial argument was right, or the initial claim was right. More, how are these modeled, and what questions you need to ask? And then the first part with the numbers on the back, that's more of a study like how does this exactly work. Whereas the canvas evidence, or the paints that were used evidence that will follow after this one, is more about, it's broader. You can copy it to other paintings. You think about, well, what palette did they use, and what kind of colors did they use, and how common were these?
Like the networks could be the same, but the numbers will be completely different.
Yeah.
For
if you
different
have different
hypotheses.
hypotheses.
Exactly, yeah. So,
But I was going to question that. I was wondering, can you assume that it's just a matter of the numbers being different?
It's
Could it
not
be
only
that
the numbers.
the network actually potentially be different according to what your kind of competing hypotheses are?
I think the majority of the network will be the same. But if you think of a fraudster, you need to take other things into account,
Yeah.
like how easy is it to get this paint, stuff like that.
Additional.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you can use the majority of it. Okay.
So, Joe, just one thing to summarise, which is what are you then doing?
So what am I doing?
What
Yeah,
are
it's
you
not-
doing? If you're not doing some of these things, then what's
So what
yeah.
I'm working on is I try to model the arguments. I use the very generic, it's made by someone else, and you could specify that more at a later point. So I have these lists of bullet points. I showed 3 examples here. And I do see that there's evidence within these bullet points, but there are questions that you need to ask yourself in order to evaluate the evidence. For example, the questions that I laid out here. So I model these pieces of evidence, the catalog, the canvas, and the palette, and then ask the follow-up questions to them and come up with the numbers and see how to combine them.
So you're modelling what they've done, basically.
And what they-
Definitely, yeah. I'm modeling
And what they should.
I'm modeling the evidence that is in this article.
He's evangelizing. He's telling them that there's a reason to use statistical methods and that they should indeed
You
apply for
should
more
have said-
funding,
Why
and so
did he
that
just say that to
someone else
start
could
with?
do.
That makes sense.
Great, that was my plan. So you got the idea from the first 2 questions, and I asked more, but we'll skip that because eventually we need to stop this. You can ask me more questions. But then given with the evidence that I got, I can sort of make a similar argument. You put in the evidence, and you see how it should sort of update your belief that something is made by Van Gogh. And then you need the actual numbers, given the alternative hypothesis and stuff like that to come, or actual numbers. You need some proper numbers to actually get a probability there. But this, again, is a proof of concept. And if I'm sort of promoting the use of this to experts within the field, and I'm saying, and now it's 0.74 where it was 0.23, then it will be like, yeah, and this project is over because this doesn't make any sense to us. Okay, what time is it? Okay.
Quarter up here.
Okay, great. So another the third thing that I was working on before and that I presented to them is that they identified the pigments that were used in the paint a sensitive measure to see whether the same palette of colors was used for this painting and that painting. And similar colors were used specifically for the sky, I believe it was, or at least that was the thing that they evaluated the sky for this painting and the sky for a sensitive measure. To what extent it was similar. And one of the things that they sort of thought was really striking is that a certain cobalt blue was used in both, which was a particular pigment that could be linked to that Van Gogh used it way more often than other people did at that time. That was something that they really, at least felt strong about. Well, this cobalt blue, that is Van Gogh. We know cobalt blue is. So here's this cobalt blue. There's lead white. It was in this one and not in this one. And then there were some others, and zinc white was in both. And again, I need to go back to these experts to ask about this. Like, I just see names of colors, lead white and zinc white, mean the same to me, namely white. But they obviously know so much more, which again sort of links to forensics. They just give me a DNA profile. You know, DNA profile, there's some numbers. But what to do with this thing? Go back to them, you ask them questions, and you get some more idea. But you get some better idea of what's going on. So I could ask about the typical set of colors they were using. And I thought, if someone is using lead white, maybe they don't want to use zinc white anymore because they have white. So I asked myself, is it possible that this happens? And again, so don't focus too much on whether the answers actually help me. They definitely help them in terms of, oh, we need to think about this. Do we want to think of individual pigments, or do we want to see sort of the broader thing that if you use this and also this, or we have a set of 40 and I always pick 30 from these, stuff like that. And as I think Joe was saying, but I'm not sure, that he often got this paint from Amsterdam because his brother would send them all the stuff that he needed. Nonetheless, you can sort of ask what is strong evidence or what is not as strong. So you have the evidence from this painting, wheat field, another wheat field, which these are present, and then you can include, well, yes, there is also cobalt blue in the Montmajour painting, which makes it more likely, so it's still very broad terms that it's the same palette, but it doesn't really say that much about whether it's the same artist, because more people would use this because, well, you buy your paint at some store, they think they have identified the actual store when when the supplies were bought, and many people in his time, if you would use that alternative hypothesis, would go to that store to buy stuff there. And then
Probably a store serves more than one person.
yeah.
Especially Van Gogh.
Yeah.
Sold it.
But can you go back to the beginning of this series? So what actually is your Bayesian network?
This
There it is.
Hmm?
So what, for instance, Wheatfield, what does that mean? What
who painted Wheatfield?
The artist. Or?
Yes.
Okay, artist is sunset. Are they the same? Are they the same? Right. And why is there an arrow from cobalt blue Montmajour to cobalt blue Wheatfield?
There is.
Yeah, why?
Okay, well
What does this
so essentially I could do this with one node.
Yeah.
You could just say, do they both have cobalt blue? But at some later point you might be interested, well, how likely is it cobalt blue was used in this one if you have some timing information? And furthermore, sort of to convey the message that in some cases you're looking at these colors and there's like way more, because I just showed 3 here. So I could definitely do this in one node. Do they both have cobalt blue? But I thought in terms of seeing the argument that you presented in your paper is also here, it's nice to have the evidence. Cobalt blue was present in this one, cobalt blue was present in that one. But you can model it in different ways. But
Well, I'm more worried about the arrows. So your model is, you've got to give a probability for using cobalt blue and Montmajour, independently of who is the painter of cobalt blue.
So not really. So in terms of if you would, I do agree that you would have to do this in terms of if you model it like this. But given that you would put in yes here, the only probability that you're interested in is how likely is it that they both have this or not? So the network, if you would model it in
Well,
such a way, gives
Yeah,
you.
you are going, the evidence is going to be yes, sure. But the model says, independently of who painted whichever paintings, there's some chance of finding cobalt blue in more mature.
Definitely.
And then the model is saying, given there's cobalt blue in more mature, and the same palette was used in those two paintings, there is some.
Yeah, so you have this
chance of
independent
cobalt
probability
blue
that you
with
need
it.
to evaluate here, but it only plays a part if before you insert the evidence, because the evidence that I insert just say there's cobalt blue in both of them, and then the actual probabilities that are in there are not that relevant. So you shouldn't see this as sort of a generic thing where you can, oh, it was present or it was not. This is made with the thought in mind. They both have cobalt blue, or one does and one does not. So again, if I would just make one note here, which has cobalt blue in both, you could have you have the same. The network works the same in terms of if you put in the actual evidence. But
Okay, so well,
I could make a different decision here. Yeah.
But then the network is suggesting that you're making all kinds of independence assumptions, which are obviously probably wrong. But actually, you're not using them because you're only going to be using the.
Yeah, so I'm aware of this, but I decided for this at least visual structure to sort of give the idea. Oh yeah, we see this. Yeah, oh we see that. But I could definitely make one note, and that would work the same. It just says, but it would only work the same if I would insert the evidence. But yeah.
Isn't this one of the probabilities you could actually maybe obtain?
How likely is it to
If
have
you were to at least
restrict
assume
yourself to
something
an
about
area?
the period, and then you know of the paintings and how many of them use cobalt blue.
In that sense, you can get a probability that I would feel that there is some sort of a basis for this probability indeed, yes. And that's way more difficult with the number
But it
of
wouldn't
facts.
be
Yeah, the point is that
Yeah.
you're not going to use it,
No.
whether you get it or not.
Well, the sort of underlying question here is, given two paintings, in each of which there is blue sky,
Mhm.
painted at around that period of the development of art, regardless of who actually painted them, how likely is it that cobalt blue would be used in both of them
Mhm.
for the blue sky?
Mhm.
Because it's a sort of a rather vivid blue,
Mhm.
and also probably readily available as well.
Yeah, okay, but readily available, and that someone will actually use this as something else. But so I do agree with many of these points that are raised there. But for many questions, I shouldn't be the only one answering this. I should sort of go back to people that have actually some idea. of
I'll
this.
come to your defence against Richard here, because actually this is one part of the this kind of modelling would actually generalise for other works as well. If you wanted to have a more general model, then you can imagine this type of structure, so that in general, you come up with a model where you don't know that those are true, but you're going into observations, and maybe some may be true and some may be false.
I definitely see the problem that Richard is seeing here, but that problem disappears in terms of that you will put in the evidence either way. But if that's not the case, then there might be a problem that there's no certain.
But
There's
when
a point
you're
that,
coming-
Sorry.
there's a point that it's like, this is just a visual representation, or you have implemented your scheme also in a package, for example, in a generalist.
Yeah, it's also in a package. Yeah, but it's I think it's more likely to show sort of a screenshot.
No, that's in that case, for
Well,
example,
Right,
Jacob,
you have to
suppose he was using cobalt blue for something.
may just continue my question.
Oh, sorry.
Because in that case, for example, since one of your problems was that the experts have a vague idea of what is the probability and so on, if you plug in the right package, and for example, a generalist could be suited, you can even put the uncertain probabilities, and then if the people say, oh, for me it's around 90%, but you would go such and such, you can model it, and then you see the effect in the result.
Mm-hmm.
Which is
Well,
nice.
absolutely the case, but that is sort of a more future work. We're now, or I'm setting up this thing where they sort of report probabilities that they believe to be relevant from them, or sort of extract an idea of the order of magnitude of certainty. But that is definitely something that would be interesting to sort of compare one expert's view over the other, because now they're just experts saying this is, oh, I'm totally sure, the other one says I'm also kind of sure. But then you could actually point in sort of look at the specific pieces of evidence and look where they disagree and whether it actually affects what you're interested in.
Same palette means the two painters have got the same collection of paints available.
More used, yes.
Well, they don't necessarily
But
use
same,
them.
yeah, so it's a broader set of like, say,
They have
40
got-
that you have.
They have got a set of colours in their paint box, and these are the ones from which they can use it.
I think there's
That's
And,
the
but
idea,
you're
isn't it?
assuming that given two painters have the same paint box, and if one of them if there's cobalt blue or mazur, there's that it means that there's a certain probability of cobalt blue and wheat field, independently of whether they're the same paint or not.
Yeah.
And that seems to me a bit nonsense.
So,
I would expect that two painters who have the same palette but who are different are going to have different chances of using
the same,
these colours
yes.
than two painters who and if, yeah.
I think I see what
So you're saying that the fact that the two paintings are painted by the same person is irrelevant once we know what palette they have.
Mm.
Do you really believe that?
If they're really,
If this is a graphical model, it's saying that
No, is this
one-
the palette of the painter or is the palette used in the painting? Because if it's the palette used in the painting,
the
then
palette
maybe
is
it's a bit more.
no, because he talks about whether or not they have the same palette,
Or it comes from the same
independently of whether or not they actually use particular colours.
no, but this is given, so this is not definitely the same. So if they're the same artist,
No, they're not.
then-
I know they're not the same.
no, but
So different artists can have the same palette.
yeah, but also
Yeah.
the same artist can have a different palette because Van Gogh would
Yeah.
use different colors back in Nuna than he would do
Okay.
in. So this is not sort of a 1-0 connection.
So you need an arrow
No,
from
palette.
artist to colour.
A palette,
Yeah,
He
palette
suggests.
an
Yeah.
artist uses changes in time, sure.
yeah,
Place or whatever.
Yeah, that's-
yeah.
But your model is saying that given the palette regarding these variables down here, whether or not it's the same artist is irrelevant.
Yeah,
I
the
think-
conditionally
I might
dependent,
find that
given the
a bit-
palette.
I think you need another
Strong
arrow.
statement.
Yeah,
I see what you mean. You want an extra arrow
Yeah,
here.
yeah, for all of them.
yeah.
So can I just add another
Yeah.
complication? Presumably, if you have cobalt,
Which doesn't make it harder to fill in the numbers.
but also if you have cobalt blue, presumably for a sky, it's different for if they use cobalt blue for skin or something like that. So it's much more. So you need. Does that need to come in somehow about what it's being
think
used
so.
for?
I
Because-
I think so, but
Yeah.
that's the same sort of point that I'm making multiple times now.
Yeah.
You can go very deep into the subject and take all this into account. You can put it on a very broad, and it's probably the right thing to do is say somewhere in between.
But did he have any distinctive uses of colours which wouldn't typically be used? I mean, obviously, blue for sky. Everyone's going to use blue for sky, and everyone's going to use cobalt blue if it's the only one
It's
around.
not true, there was.
Well, no,
yeah,
it's-
sky is-
No, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just the general point that
Yeah.
there was something distinctive about him using purple somewhere where
Someone
for
else.
where typically people did. I mean,
I
that
see.
does speak to.
I see what you. I think that is a reasonable point, but I
Distinctive
don't know this. Yeah.
that
I
we
could
use.
ask this to people that have actually some idea of this, but I wouldn't
Yeah.
know.
This
Yeah,
is
diff-
I mean,
distinctive combinations of
look,
colours that he
exactly.
would use.
You have to
Yeah.
abstract. It's, we've gone in for exactly the same thing. Nadine will tell you with Pat Wiltshire and her these enormous
Yeah.
number of components with the pollen stuff. At the end of the day, it's pointless to attempt to model the individual components. You have to end up with these abstractions like, you've got to get an expert. You've got to rely on an expert to say if there are specifically distinctive colours which are common to both. That type of thing. It's the only way. It's the only way it can
Totally.
be done.
At this point, I do agree with you
Yeah.
because sort of a follow-up on this is that I presented this for a larger group at the Hof Museum, and then the girl that was working on the actual paint evidence for this article came to me and she said, "Well, we should look at this paint work because you have discussed now with someone that is an expert on style, but now it would be interesting to also discuss this with me." So, like, this is not the final product. There's not really sort of final product. Sort of laid out what should there be in the end, sort of a more common understanding of how to model this and what to take into account. But all these pieces of evidence require different expertise from someone from the Van Gogh Museum. They're all able to give an idea of, well, how likely is something, because they're all experts on Van Gogh, but specifically they're an expert on this or an expert on that. And someone did come forward for the paint evidence, and they mentioned exactly what you're saying now, that Nadine apparently also is working on with the soil and with PET. Okay. So let's move on. So now we move to some sort of a more of the challenges that I'm also working on now. Although again the question is, will we jump into this and jump into that? So these were different questions that I asked experts there. What do we want to work on? We cannot work on everything within this pilot study, but what do we want to work on now? And as you were mentioning, that at least to you, at least I believe, a very compelling piece of evidence is the typical brush strokes. And that's also,
I don't know how typical they were of Van Gogh himself, but they are clearly very distinctive.
Yeah, that's
When you look at them.
I see what you mean. Yeah. And well, in the article they mention this, and they say that for example, the short strokes that were used for the leaves of the trees on the horizon are almost identical to those in another painting assumed to be by Van Gogh called Public Garden. So there, at least they say, well, this is a very distinctive feature, and we believe that Van Gogh was able to do this, and that he did do this as well, because the type that he did, the trees here, the trees on the other. In terms of if you would zoom in on the paint itself, or you would look over these paintings like with a magnifying glass, that you would say, well, this is a very distinctive feature. And apparently he used this before. But as Rasmus was saying with the paint, that you can have some idea, that you could come up with some number, that you have at least some data behind it. That here I think that is very very difficult. Both if you would have a very broad alternative hypothesis or very specific, or very specific wouldn't make any sense, because in this case you don't have some sort of an alternative like, well, then let's go again, or someone else.
The Frostman.
Yeah. So for these bullet points, I again definitely believe that it should increase your belief that this was also made by Van Gogh, but I find it really difficult to sort of extract what I can actually model here, because I think that within characteristic detail, you sort of should look at the full thing. Painting trees in a certain way says something about the brushes that you were using, gives you an idea of what was used for the sky. Just, again, thinking out loud here. So this is something that, well, I'm not really discussing this with them at the moment, but I've sort of laid down that I think this is really difficult in terms of evaluating the evidence. There are sort of two different departments in art history. You have the connoisseurs, the art historians that just look at a painting and say, well, this is obviously by this guy because of all these brush strokes and all these characteristic details. There's also the more technical side, which has to do with looking at the canvas or looking at the types of paint that were used. And what these connoisseurs or these experts are just looking at a page and looking at the brush strokes, and also the letter that I was mentioning in the beginning, to actually determine what to use as evidence here and how it all is dependent on each other, I believe is more difficult. And the other part is this. The other thing that I would like to work on, and that's actually what I'm working on now to get some idea, is that part of the paint or of the article says about this painting, and even today the area abounds in these distinctively Mediterranean trees with their holly-shaped leaves and twisted trunks. On top left are the ruins bathed in the late afternoon sun, which have made it possible to pin down the precise spot at Van Gogh's orientation. He was looking west on the plateau about a kilometer from Montmajour, just south of the road that winds its way to Fontville. So they sort of said he was sitting here. Well, that probably is very interesting in terms of, well, we've attributed to Van Gogh. If it's by Van Gogh, then we can probably pinpoint the exact spot where he made it. because, well, he sent this letter from that place, and this is the abbey and stuff like that. So I think that if you can sort of pinpoint this, that is really awesome. If you can say, well, this was the place where it was made. But to evaluate this evidence, again, I believe that there is some sort of evidence in the similarity of the painting and the location near our lab. But it's sort of to substantiate what it is exactly. It's like how many of these abbeys are there in France or in Europe or in, and how does it differ between times, and that this is there, and should you take seasons into account? There are like many things that you can do. So this is another problem, but I'm working on this actually now, where I do believe that it's you have to make some hard choices in terms of assumptions, how you will model this, because the overall idea of the presentation is you have all these lists of bullet points for different pieces of evidence, and for some, although you might need to do some work, you can come up with a model and you can discuss it. But for some, it's again, you do see that there is evidence there, but at least at this point, I think it's really difficult to use that and put it into a Bayesian network, which is essentially what they want me to do, sort of to structurize their argument. And many of these arguments in the article sort of go two ways. One is we have evidence which links to Van Gogh, and this is another piece, and also the letter. Given that it's made by Van Gogh, now we can sort of explain the evidence.
Cognitive bias.
Yeah. Like, but
Contextual bias.
in that sense,
Yeah.
like the evidence for the location, and also the other thing that's not mentioned here is where has this painting been since it was painted by, say that it was painted by Van Gogh, where it has been. I also think that that's a very interesting thing to model, but again, it's very difficult to think of, even if there's an alternative, if you have a proper alternative to still model this evidence, because they claim, well, given that it's made by Van Gogh, then it was there in the apartment in Paris, then it went to that exhibition, then someone sold it, this person brought it to Norway, it was put in the attic. So if you read it, it's really interesting to get the full story in terms of, oh, he painted it in this spot. But then you sort of have to accept, well, this was made by Van Gogh. And that's also interesting to see where the painting has been over time. But to evaluate the evidence, like here, is at least very challenging. Well, the other part is also challenging, but this is substantially more challenging. So let's conclude, because we're past 12. So this is about the other case study that we will work on. I only had some sort of details from the start, because I think 1 or 2 weeks from now, I can tell a bit about this. So this is a painting that is in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, which is called Malababa, and it's made by Frans Hals, attributed to Frans Hals. Oh, sorry, no, this one is in Berlin, excuse me. This one is in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and it's made by Hans van Meegen, which is a very famous forger in the Netherlands.
Really good.
Yeah, and this one is in New York, and they're like not sure whether it's made by Frans Hals, by one of his students, because Frans Hals did have students that worked in his studio, or also a forger that tried to do this. So that's also the reason that I did not look at the forger in the Van Gogh study, because, well, the idea is that we also do this one, and then for this one it is interesting to look at specifically this alternative hypothesis, because a forger or someone from his studio, because the many pieces of evidence are not relevant anymore. If it's by Frans Hals or someone from his studio, then anything that has to do with his studio, like the types of paint that were used or the type of canvas that was used, is relevant, because it was made in the studio either by Van Hals or, and then you have to look at the characteristic details. And this is the other one that sort of should give some idea of what a forger is able to do, even if you're a very good one. Can you, even 100 years after this was painted, still come up with the proper materials? And that's where Hans Meegen was very good at, which made it very difficult to attribute paintings. And many of his paintings were attributed to, I should be careful because I might make a mistake, but I think to Vermeer, and then later on was shown that this is not a Vermeer. But it's interesting because I've been to all of these presentations with actual experts, and then they show these three, and there are like experts, and they say, well, this is obviously not Frans Hals. This is really badly done, and it doesn't make any sense to have this in the museum. And I'm like, I thought it was quite good. So I sort of, even if
The owl's really bad.
if you look at them more up close, then I do think that some of the facial expression of this was better. But it's interesting to speak with them and see what they sort of have to extract the information that they have that you might not have. And I think that is in a way similar to people that are experts in fingerprints. That they see two fingerprints, you say, oh, obviously another of, and they say, well, this is the same. And you sort of have to extract what they use in order to be able to make this very strong argument regarding whether something is made by Van Saals or not. But the idea is that this painting in Berlin, this one in Berlin, they will go there, I believe in 2 or 3 weeks from now, and actually try to get some evidence out of the painting in terms of getting a small piece of paint and stuff like that in order to compare these two and see how this plays in place. Okay, that concludes it.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
One thing that would shift the probabilities and all this stuff would be if you could get some DNA, right?
Yes,
Do they,
definitely.
I mean, of course, the paintings will be covered with DNA from thousands of people subsequently contaminated, but perhaps the artist is embedded in the paint, and if it hasn't been X-rayed too much, it might still be there.
Yeah, I've heard this claims made, and also by themselves. I'm not, it would be really convincing evidence, but I wonder from how many painters they still have some sort of proper idea what his or her DNA.
But a really good forger would go and get some of it.
Yeah.
Would have gone and
have to
got the
observe.
sport from.
Is it DNA from the bone or is it? Yeah. But indeed, it has been mentioned, but I
You can
have no clue
unearth
that this
as well.
could be a thing.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah, we could, that would be a nice DNA.
Look at smaller places and check DNA. I don't know the details of how Van Gogh would have handled his own paints, but artists I have watched don't actually touch with their fingers the paint itself.
I haven't read anything about this, whether Van Gogh would do this, but that would make that. But then still, it's possible that there's DNA in there. He might
Oh,
have
certainly
painted
handle
that
canvas.
sneeze on top
Canvas,
of
you
it.
have
Canvas,
to,
yes.
you have to put the canvas on every cup.
I wasn't sure whether you were modelling the decision making of the experts versus some more objective, trying to do something more objective. Because they seem like, even though they're linked, they're slightly different projects. Like trying to do some kind of capturing of the expert inference and stuff like that, versus just trying to kind of do a more kind of, if you like, objective analysis. And I'm just wondering whether what you see yourself as doing or what they'd like you to do. Or do they, because they are slightly different, like trying to capture what these experts, what information they use to make their judgments, trying to capture that might not be quite the same thing as trying to capture what is
Yeah.
the, and I wasn't sure.
To them it's the same.
Well, to them it's the same.
But you need,
Yeah, we're
you
not-
need them to.
We're not sort of evaluating the sort of the opinion of the decision of the expert at this point. But there are like many directions, and the initial study could have gone in many directions, but they initially fixated on this attributing paintings to painter and how to evaluate this evidence.
Both are interesting projects.
They're like
both trying to capture what the expert is doing when they're making their judgments versus what, if there is some kind of like more objective way of capturing the.
Yeah, well, when I started working on this a couple of months ago, like not simply this, but this project as a whole, I was sort of skeptical about how much there was there to do. But there are like many directions we can go into now, and there is like the question: what is the most interesting and what is the most useful? So I think that this work on Bonjour is quite interesting because you have to think really hard about: do I want to make assumption on the time frame or the location? But they might not think that's the most interesting. And also we still have to sort of learn from each other, like what does it mean that something is interesting to me, what is something interesting to you? And although we're getting there, we're not speaking the same language at some point. So there were many discussions of different experts on Van Gogh, and then they said, well, is this hard evidence? No, it's soft evidence. And I was like, what is this hard and soft evidence? And also it's interesting that you mentioned, Julia, that you mentioned this, that you said this 180 is quite compelling evidence, wouldn't you say? And that was exactly
Right,
what
so
I
that-
felt when I read the whole thing, and exactly what Marianne thought when she read the whole thing. And so anyone that's at least not from the field feels like, well, this is something that is sort of really difficult to get your hands on, because there's this little notebook lying around the Van Gogh Museum, and the handwriting is the same. But when I said, yeah, of course, it's 180, that's the striking piece. Like, no, it's like the brush strokes. It's like so there are so many differences in terms of how to evaluate the evidence, and I also think that in terms of how you actually do evaluate the evidence yourself is really different. So I evaluate all the evidence. So
No,
my
what I was
training-
trying to say is that comparing the 180 to the 100, which you know that the 100, or you assume the 100 comes from,
was put on
was
there
put on there.
in relation to the inventory.
If you want to test that this is done by the same person, or if someone has tried to forge it, the forger will really copy exactly the downstrokes and the upstrokes, and there's a whole load of analysis is done on that, comparative of handwriting, and I'm sure, I mean, that would give you a probabilistic measure whether those two are done by the same.
I guess that if you also, it's just alternative hypothesis of a forger should take into account that this painting is not up for sale or something. So even if the only gain that you get from it is that people would say, well, this person that we don't know who it is, or at least not, the public doesn't know, I don't know, has a Van Gogh, but that person will not sell it. So that's sort of, in a way, to me at least, debunks that it is a forger that wants to get the Van Gogh
No,
signature
the
on there.
contrary, it was the person who sold it to the Norwegian embassy or whatever, 150 or whatever it was years ago.
Yeah, in 1902.
Because they did pass it off, and he then decided it wasn't a Van Gogh.
No, he didn't. A friend of his did.
Well,
Yeah.
Just going back to
It
that
was-
thing of forging, I mean,
That
they
actually
forge
provides
on
responsibility.
letters, but I'm sure with painting too, they can tell if it's an exact copy because he's trying to imitate the exact downstrokes and cross strokes and thickness of the paint.
There's something else too. Van Gogh also made copies of some of his paintings,
Yeah.
and that's pretty well documented.
Well, that's not in here, but there are drawings
Yeah.
in the Van Gogh Museum of the exact same thing, all very close to what you're seeing on the painting here. So, as I said, there's way more evidence, but they have a drawing which sort of very resembles the painting that you see here on that area. Yeah.
Yeah, so that kind of thing too can be very helpful.
But this was apparently originally first painted, if there were multiples, only 2 years before Van Gogh died.
Yes.
So it would be unlikely he personally made a copy of that, with only 2 years left, and he wasn't in a good
Put that
mental
in the
state.
network.
You would have had a preliminary drawing.
He was a bit off the rails, wasn't he?
I could certainly, I think we should wrap up this, but we could certainly distribute this. You can also find it online, this original article, but I think it's really interesting to read how they sort of present the evidence, because it's way more story-like. Like we can exactly point out he was sitting there in the sun, and they claim, well, he was in a hurry. It's really weird to read this.
when you build the
Haven't
narrative.
they?
But that's
It's
like
the
prosecution, that's
inventor
like
that-
prosecution.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Yeah, I
That's
agree.
exactly the same. It's the lawyer, it's the prosecution lawyer. Opening statement.
He's sitting in the sun with the
He was
same
sitting
potato,
like
with the same
The
potato.
defendant was sitting in the sun. Looking at the room.
Before you close down,
Oh, sorry.
You
Yeah.
mentioned
Is it
the
possible
Let me-
to
like,
take-
sorry.
You know that Howland Will case?
But you were in danger of
Or in
saying that
the-
the probability that he did it rather than the probability that